Let's double check. And good evening, everyone. Hi, it's 4 p.m. here in Poland. It's 3 p.m. in London, and I've got Thunderous One with me. And we're today going to be talking about Khadija, the first and true prophet of Islam. Thank you very much for coming, Thunderous. Always good speaking with you. I'll open the floor to you.
Hi everybody, and hi Lloyd. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to discuss this week's subject, which is Khadija, and why I think, based on Islamic sources, Khadija is actually the true source of Islam, and not necessarily so Muhammad. And I base my opinion based on Islamic's own internal sources, particularly the Hadith, and also the life course of Muhammad as he slowly evolved into a prophet. So the way I've kind of like presented the material is very much like not so much a discussion, but like as a narrative as it unfolds, but with pointed questions asked. And I'd like the audience, if they can, sort of like imagine that they're on like a fly on the wall documentary team watching things as they unfold, as Islam slowly gets sown inside Muhammad from his wife, and how she seems to be the one taking control of the events, whilst Muhammad, as we're going to see, has a different attitude up until and after her death. So the way I've just started this is like, just imagine yourself as a fly on the wall documentary team,
So
recording
just pause there.
and document.
Just pause it for a moment. I was hoping you'd give just a brief sort of overview / introduction. But am I correct in saying that Muhammad meets this demon who nearly chokes him to death, or whatever the case might be, right? And according to different accounts, tells him to read or tells him to recite, depending on which source you read, right? So Muhammad is being choked or squeezed or who knows what. He's being told read, told recite, pick one. And he thinks that he's being molested by a demon. Now, I do want to state that I'm busy doing a series of... thank you very much, everyone, for the recent donations. I need to say thank you very much for that. I've actually bought some books recently, and I'm going to be doing a discussion in the future which ties into what Thunderous will be discussing, which is the pre-Islamic Arabia. So we're going to be looking at what Muhammad would call the period of the Jahiliyyah, the condition of ignorance, also called the time of ignorance prior to the coming of Islam. However, and there's a lot of parallels, there's a lot of crazy connections in that history and that culture that connects to Islam, that connects Islam to its pagan roots, to its historical Arab pagan roots. But it's Khadija that said, hold on, Muhammad, you're not being molested by a demon, because Muhammad thought he was being molested by a demon and wanted to kill himself. She said, hold on, buddy, this is good stuff. Is that correct?
This is the point. You mentioned several things in there. For instance, of Jahiliyyah, the period of ignorance, and we know it's the period of ignorance because Muhammad's own grandfather's name is Abdullah, slave of Allah.
Well, technically, it's not actually the period of ignorance; it's the condition of ignorance, because people are still in the Jahiliyyah today, even though Islam has arrived. There is still Jahiliyyah, so it's not really the period; it's the condition.
Okay. However, the Islam wants to infer the period, whether it's a condition or an understanding of or their lack of understanding at the time. There is enough evidence to know that wherever the truth was, they certainly did not know it at that time. One of the points is, where was Muhammad going and why? We don't find, even though meditation is good as far as understanding from a biblical narrative's point of view is concerned, but we're meditating on scripture. We're not going to a cave. We're not isolating ourselves and trying to commune with some kind of spirit force. What Muhammad was doing there is a question in itself. Why would he go there? What was his motive? What were the influences that made him think that he should go to a cave in the first place? We don't find any of this kind of form of meditation in the biblical narrative. You mentioned again, the angel grabbing hold of him and squeezing him. I mean,
quote
even
unquote
that in itself,
angel,
when you look,
we don't know, because think of the Burak that took Muhammad to the seventh heaven. Was it a horse? Was it a potato? Was it a mule? We don't know. Was it a unicorn? People just say it's a horse, but again, we don't know if it was an angel, something, an entity accosted Muhammad, right?
This is it. I mean, just going on the Burak. I mean, a winged horse. Where have you seen that before? Well, it was a part of Greek mythology before
the
Islam
Persians
came around. So
the
already you
Zoroastrians
can
had that.
see
Yep.
Yeah, so you can see a tapestry in history of where certain ideas come from. But with Muhammad, I'm using the biblical, sorry, the Islamic narrative and try and sort of like show the disconnection it has with the biblical narrative. Because if an angel had appeared to Muhammad, and we know it wasn't, but let's look at the narrative. When you look at the biblical narrative, every time an angel appears, we don't find men wanting to commit suicide or men thinking that they're going insane. We don't find angels grabbing hold of men, wrestling with them, wanting to hurt them or squeezing them tight. What we find is the first things that come out of their mouths are, peace be with you, oh blessed one. Always a positive message. When
Right.
Jesus was in Gethsemane, for instance, praying, an angel appeared to him and was giving him an encouraging message. When an angel appeared
Mm.
before Manoah, telling him that he's going to give birth to a son and that no razor should come upon his head because he's going to be serving as a judge,
Right.
selected for special purpose. We do not find in the biblical narratives angels grabbing hold of men, squeezing them, asking them to do something that they're incapable of doing. Now, some people could say read or recite, whichever one it was. Muhammad couldn't do it.
Right. Which, on this
Muhammad,
point, would it be accurate to state that if we look at the biblical narrative, prophets normally meet God or meet the the representative of God on something like a mountaintop or an open plain? Muhammad went into a hole, a
yes,
dark hole,
this is
a
it. He
cave.
goes and isolates himself. Yeah, he
Isn't
goes
that
and
strange that he
isolates
goes
himself.
into a dark cave and he meets what lives in dark caves? Besides, if you've watched Lord of the Rings, you'll know Shelob lives in the dark cave. Trolls live in the dark cave. Am I correct or wrong?
In when you're looking at fantasy or the world of fantasy and make believe, you do, or even in the myths and legends, you do find what you're saying there, that certainly demonic presences are sort of associated with darkness, whereas angels are normally and truth is normally associated with light. So in
Yeah.
that context, you're absolutely right.
Yeah. Well, before I
But
begin, before if I interrupt you one more time, and then I'll let you.
sure.
Everyone, I've mentioned this to you before, and I believe Thunderous. We said we would discuss this at some point. Um, it's been very difficult because I know a lot of the Islamic sources have been scrubbed, but this and the original link is gone. Luckily, it's been kept here in this forum. Occultism in the Family of Muhammad by Dr. Rafat Amari. And I have posted the link and it's in the description. But do realize that occultism is a known part of the family of Muhammad, who were all part of various sects that did sort of whatever worship. And Khadija was said to be a priest or priestess within this cult. So so have a look through this when you guys have time. The first wife of Muhammad, and you'll see that she wasn't supposedly an Ebionite occult priest, and even his father and grandfather were all involved in various cults. So there's a history of occultism within his family.
And you can certainly see that to be true because you see very much an occultish behavior or pattern within Islam in itself, in the way that we see things. They're walking around the Kaaba 7 times, throwing the stones at symbolic Satan, the running to between Marwa and Sawa.
Mm-hmm.
The ablutions, the shaving of head, the wearing of the white when on Hajj, all these things have some kind of pagan or spiritualistic, ritualistic pattern that you do not see resonating with in any facet of the biblical narrative. You mentioned something there as well about Khadija being a priestess, but I would like to draw the audience's attention to your discussion maybe about 2 months ago, where you brought out an interesting point about Muhammad being light, or the first thing that Allah
Mm-hmm.
created was the light of Muhammad, which is quite interesting because that can reconcile. We can try, or Muslims can try and reconcile themselves with this, because if Muhammad was the light in heaven, and if I remember correctly, your discussion, all prophets had a piece of Muhammad's light whilst they were prophets. Is
Correct.
that correct?
Yeah, that is very much part
Why
of the
then?
Seerah.
Then if that's the case, then all the other prophets never had this experience, and Muhammad would have come with more light because it was his own light than any of the previous prophets before him. So why is it Muhammad's trying to commit suicide? Why is it Muhammad thinks he's going insane? Why is Muhammad frightened if he is
Those are
the light? He
those
was,
questions.
so he would have had more light than this. Sorry?
fair questions, and it's between, I think, this Waraka and Khadija, because Waraka gets him after Khadija sends Muhammad to him, and they start to spin their own Gnostic and occult tales, and
Yes.
Muhammad buys into this. There's which is partly discussed in this article. Yes.
Yeah, so yeah, that comes later, which is interesting because after he gives testimony to Muhammad that he's a prophet, he suddenly dies a week later. There's no coincidence there, I'm sure. But just so moving forward on this then, so an illiterate man who is in his early 40s, known locally as the truthful one, because allegedly he never lies to anyone, and we can understand Islamic sources are never going to have Muhammad lie to anyone, so he's going to come into history with a irrefutable history of integrity. As he goes about his routine to a cave for some seclusion, and there in solitude he meditates for a period of time. What next takes place can be found in many hadith of Islam that triggers a chain of events that have significantly changed the course of history for the worst. The irony is that this change has been triggered by a woman, Muhammad's first wife, and his boss, Khadija. Why is this an irony? Well, Khadija's own history testifies to the freedoms experienced by women in pre-Islamic Arabia. First, she was a businesswoman. She was an employer. She is wealthy. Though wealth and having a thriving business do not testify to having an education or being literate, what it does testify to is being smart, savvy, deserving, and adventurous. She and her peers enjoy freedom, free will, and the ability to make autonomous decisions while simultaneously being respected and no doubt honored and revered. So that should be something that Muslims in the audience should pay attention to, really, when you consider pre-Islam and women and post-Islam and women. It is with irony that Khadija's resulting actions thus plunge women subsequently after her death into a state of insignificance as mere incubators, incapable, unintelligent. I think probably best put by Hamza Kashgari whilst describing the status of women's rights in Saudi Arabia when he said that women won't go to hell because it's impossible to go there twice. Now, when you have a man in Saudi Arabia, I think he was a columnist in one of the Saudi Arabian papers and a poet as well and a critic of the regime, making a comment about women's rights in Saudi Arabia by saying they won't go to hell twice. What does that tell you, Lloyd, about the status of women from a man's first-hand experience?
Women have a very low status in Islam. I've been to Saudi Arabia several times, and it's a miserable place. A miserable place.
And the irony is, I keep using that word, is that outside of the Western world, all you find is women activists that are pro-Islam or even feminists that speak nothing of glorious things but of Muhammad and Islam. Yet the legacy in Islamic countries is clear for anyone to see, but nobody seems to want to address that. And I've often said, like people like Linda Sarsour, and I'm sure there are many other ones, but she certainly comes to mind, is, well, I'll tell you what, why do you go to Saudi Arabia and speak like that? But just make sure it's a one-way ticket and write your will first. Yeah, right. Make sure it's a one-way ticket and make sure you write your will.
Yeah,
because you won't be coming back.
If I can mention something from this article, because at some point it would be very interesting to dissect this article and go through the occult aspects of Islam, which I've been working on slowly. But they mention here that Waraka was a leading figure in the Ahnaf. He used to make tahnuf, which meant he spent time in the caves of Hara, separating himself from the rest of society for months at a time. Such practices were common amongst heretics, as we learned from the early Christian fathers, and were known among leaders of occult sects. Khadija used to make tahnuf at the same caves. Waraka was the one who convinced Muhammad to be a prophet. After returning home from the cave of Hara, where he went, he was frightened. He told his wife that a spirit claiming to be Gabriel appeared to him and choked him 3 times. Muhammad was convinced that he had a devil inside him. Khadija insisted that he became a prophet of Allah. And it says here, it's interesting to note that when angels appeared in the Bible, they never threatened anyone or imposed a prophetic role upon them.
Exactly that. Exactly. And that's kind of obvious to see when you look at the biblical narrative, that Islam comes out with something that is totally inconsistent with the past. And when you consider Waraka and the state of, I mean, we're talking about Saudi Arabia now, so we have to understand that Jesus himself said, I think it's in Matthew chapter 18, and certainly is it First John or Second John, talking about the Antichrist, talks about an Antichrist. Many people tend to think of as being an individual person, but really, when you look at, because John uses the word Antichrist, but he also gives you the meaning. This is the Antichrist, the one that denies the Father and the Son. And then John goes on to translate, even now there are many Antichrists. So an Antichrist is basically somebody who does not accept that Jesus is the Son of God and does not accept Jesus and God at the same simultaneously.
Mm-hmm.
That is the biblical definition. So when Jesus is then going, previously says that when he goes away, meaning after his execution, that that Satan will sow weeds amongst the wheat. You could already see a pattern that as time is moving forward after Jesus' death and the apostles are dying out, that Satan and the demons are infiltrating the Christian congregations as they were in the first century with this apostate type thinking or apostate doctrine. So by the time you got to the 6th century with Waraka, there's probably very little Christianity in this so-called Christian left. We're finding more pagan traditions
Mm-hmm.
and spiritistic practices within this brand of Christianity than what we're finding when we consider the narrative in the Bible. So I think that's quite interesting that Saudi Arabia would have been cut off and not much truth as to what the reality is. And we know that's true because when you look at the Quran is full of more stories and myths than there are stories that are actually coming from the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
You would expect to see a pattern of narratives and stories and accounts historically from the Hebrew scriptures and the Greek scriptures migrating, if it's a continuation, over to the Quran. But we do not see that. We just see the same stories that we know that have been myths that have been floating around before.
There's a couple of comments
Also,
here.
as well, I think it's interesting. So I just want to make, so
Sure.
before I forget this point, it's interesting that Muhammad and Islam uses the name Gabriel for this angel that grabbed hold of Muhammad in the cave. Why do you think that is?
I've wondered about that. I haven't looked into that in depth, but it is it wasn't he
I think it's
the main angel, the head angel?
he's the only one that's mentioned in the Bible. It's interesting that the
Oh,
only angel that they
fascinating.
mentioned, I mean, God talks about the Bible mentions myriads and myriads upon angels,
But
but
only
only
names
angel
one.
Gabriel is the one that is only names one exactly. Is it any wonder then that the Quran and Islam mentions the angel Jibril because it's the only one that's mentioned in the Hebrew texts?
Wow.
Do we not see a pattern developing yet?
What a coincidence. A couple of comments. Jack Black says that after Waraka died, Muhammad, for 3 years, Muhammad had no inspirations.
Right.
So where was he? So was who was his muse sitting on his shoulder telling him things? Was it this Waraka?
Yes, I think that. I also think that Muhammad was so much under the influence of Khadija that little came during that period of time because it more or less came from Khadija and Waraka until.
Ah, your audio's dropped out.
Happened. You think he a woman while Khadija's alive. It is only after she dies that he goes on a marriage splurge.
Thunderous, you disappeared for about 10 seconds. If you can just repeat that, please. Your audio dropped out. Okay, guys, looks like we've lost Thunderous. He just dropped off the yeah, our Skype link just died, so I'm going to wait for him to try and call me back. Just going to give him a second. Thunderous, are you with us?
Yes, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Yeah.
So I'm not sure what happened there. I do so
Yeah.
apologise.
Sorry, the last minute or so, your audio just died, and we couldn't hear you.
Okay, so basically, I think that Khadija, while Khadija was alive, she was basically controlling Muhammad while she was alive. It's only after she dies that he comes into his own, and he starts marrying women after she's dead. He doesn't marry anybody while she's alive, probably because he knows he can't get away with it. The interesting thing is he's probably waiting for her to die, and not wanting to upset her until after he's inherited her wealth.
Right.
There's too many things that are non-Islamic or non-religious going on here. Then that it seems to be almost political at this moment, and contrived, and there's a machination behind it. He doesn't marry anybody while she's alive, and he doesn't seem to want to upset her while she's alive. So when you think about women's rights, he doesn't say anything about anything derogatory about women or treating women in a negative way. It's only after she dies that he starts to take on that kind of rhetoric.
That's interesting. So he has a different view of women, and then he decides to become a womanizer after she dies.
After she dies and he inherits the wealth and such. It's almost like he had a contempt for women there, and then it was only made manifest after she passes away. So Al-Bukhari's, if we start using some of the then, so Al-Bukhari says, the angel caught me forcibly and pressed me so hard that I could not bear it anymore. He released me and again asked me to
Which
read.
one was
I
that?
replied, I do not. I haven't written down the reference here, actually, but I can post it in the notes later on. He released me and asked me to read. I replied, I do not know how to read. Thereupon he caught me again and pressed me a second time till I could not bear it anymore. He released me and again asked me to read. But again I replied, I do not know how to read. Or it could be interpreted, or what shall I read? Thereupon he caught me a third time and pressed me and released me and said, read in the name of your Lord, who created man from a clot. Read. Then there's another hadith. This one is Al-Tabari, volume 1, page
Hold on a second.
68.
So that was Bukhari, Hadith 3, Book 1, Hadith 3, or Volume 1, Book 1, Hadith 3. I've got it up here on the screen. I just did a search for that.
Okay.
So that everyone can see that. Read in the name of your Lord. Now, how do you squeeze someone or choke them and suddenly they can read? What was he reading? Was there a book in front of him? What was he reading? Because this is very imprecise.
The thing is that it's going back to the point that one of the audience mentioned earlier about where when an angel appeared before a man from the biblical narrative, it's always peace be with you. The first thing the angel wants to do is reassure the.
I just pause a second. We are being told that the audio is cutting in and out. This is now from the YouTube dashboard. Everyone, I'm getting an excellent connection. It's showing me that the connection is very good. So, are you there? Hey, Thunderous.
I'm not sure what's going on here today. It's certainly not my
I'm
connection.
getting errors. I'm getting serious errors. The stream health. There's a serious connection problem here. So let's. There's a serious connection problem. I am just checking my speed, but my internet connection, YouTube is showing serious errors.
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah. So, did you want to look at this another time, or shall I continue?
Okay, no, I think. Okay, there's. Okay, everyone. I've. Can you please let me know if the connection is better now? OBS just for some reason disconnected and reconnected. because we were having an intermittent audio issue. Apparently, things were connecting. Okay, I've got someone saying now it's fine. Um, so yeah, for some reason YouTube started to give me some serious errors. Okay, now it's saying the stream is healthy. Now it's saying the stream is. Yeah, my apologies, everyone. This is one of those technical glitches. It was showing healthy stream, and then okay, so yeah, okay. Right now, YouTube is saying the stream is healthy again. I had some serious errors. It said the stream no data, then stream healthy, then no data, then errors, and now the stream is healthy. And okay, so now, and I'm getting a pretty high speed connection. Um, I'm getting over 300 megabits per second right now, and getting full upload, which is yeah, getting over 300 megabits, well over 300 now. So my apologies for that, everyone. I think the technical issue is past. Now, OBS for some reason disconnected, reconnected, just gave me a message. So let's continue then.
Okay.
I do apologize. So let's go back a couple of minutes, Thunderous, just for the audience. So so the question is, Almir asks, isn't it Ikra, recite? However, some sources say read and some sources say recite. Now, what is he supposed to recite if he has not been given something to memorize in advance? And what is he reading if technically A, he's illiterate, and B, there's no book given to him to read from or paper? And then third, the idea of Muhammad being illiterate is taken by many scholars not to mean that he was literally illiterate. What it means is that he was an empty vessel that could be filled, someone who didn't have this knowledge that would then fabricate it. He had to be given this knowledge. So it means he was pure, and so in theory, Muhammad was literate and could read and write. As a trader, this would be a required function.
Not necessarily. I think that's just total Islamic propaganda and hogwash. They're trying to iron out the creases here, and it's not working. The reason why I say that is because if the angel turned around and says to him, recite, as an example, in the text, there should be something that the angel's saying for Muhammad to recite, but he's not. That's omitted. So for me, it has to be something like when it says read. And the angel, well, it's clearly not an angel in reality, but the spirit creature in this instance must have been presented him something to read. Now, what I'm going to go back to is when you look at Jesus's baptism, for instance, Satan approaches him on the third challenge, turns around and says, he basically puts out his hand and says, I'll give you all these kingdoms, and he shows the kingdoms and all their glory. We do not know what actually took place in that moment between Satan and Jesus when he showed him all the kingdoms. But something extra must have taken place beyond human being comprehension. I will use that example of a demon with Jesus when he shows him an expression or whatever manifestation it was of all the kingdoms and their glory. In this instance, when a demon is basically showing Muhammad something and asking him to read, but Muhammad's incapable of reading it. As far as being literate or illiterate and being a trader is concerned, that's an irrelevance. You don't need to be able to read. All you need to be able to do is count. You're there to buy and sell. People have been trading without having a formal education or even an education for thousands of years and still are successful traders. So I don't buy that he was an empty vessel and he could be poured in. That sounds like we've got to clean up our guy here. So we've got a guy, he can't read or write, he's illiterate. We've got to try and clean this up somehow to make him more pure than he really is. So that's my take on that.
Right. Now, there was a second hadith you wanted to turn to?
Yeah, so it's in Al-Tabari, volume 1, page 68, and it reads here, he, Muhammad, said, I have been thinking of hurling myself down from a mountain crag. But he appeared to me as I was thinking about this and said, Muhammad, I am Gabriel, and you are the messenger of God. He then said, recite. I said, what shall I recite? He took me and pressed me 3 times tightly until I was nearly stifled and was utterly exhausted. Then he said, recite in the name of your Lord who created. And I recited it, and then went to Khadija and said, I have been fearful my life. So I just want to add on here, there are many hadith that relate this account, some giving more or less details, the same details, but invariably all recounting to the reader the same first experience, namely Muhammad had an unpleasant experience in a cave with a spirit creature. Now, from this instance or incidents in the cave, we find he staggers home to Khadija, his 55-year-old wife, boss, with conviction and fear that he has seen a spirit creature and that he was demon possessed. Ishaq relates Khadija wraps around him a blanket and proceeds to console him. Khadija does not seem to believe that Muhammad was being possessed or that he has just had a demonic experience. As she states as she goes on to state, Allah would not treat you like this, since he knows you're of good character. So rejoice and be glad. I have a hope that you will be a prophet of all this community. Now, these are the questions that I ask from the hadiths that have been mentioned. Her husband comes home clearly terrified after this encounter, yet Khadija is not in the slightest concern for him. There are no questions, and there seems to be no sense of anguish, anxiety, or urgency. Point 2. Sure, she wraps a blanket around him, but it seems that this account reveals of her sense of knowing, experience, or even a certain sense of expectation, as the hadith later goes on to reveal. Point 3. She's confident it's not a demon, but an angel. But how does or would Khadija know this? She certainly was no eyewitness to the event, yet she already knows the nature and character of her husband's spiritual encounter. How? Point 4. She then makes a bold, knowing statement that not only does Allah know Muhammad's character, but he will not treat you thus. Khadija knows more about Allah and his nature than the man who will go on to become, in Islamic theology, the mercy to mankind. And some point 4 that I want to sort of draw back on to the Muhammad being created of light. Muhammad should know all of this. If he's the mercy to mankind and the light that was in heaven and the light that every other prophet had, we should not be reading any of these things, should we?
Well, interestingly, Muhammad, from his birth or prior to his birth, there were portents, there were signs. And then at his birth, there were certain major signs, like a certain lake was drained. 12 of the minarets or towers of the emperor's castle fell. There was a bright light that issued across from east to west. His mother shone, a light shone from his mother's vajayjay, 1,300 kilometers from Mecca to Busra in Syria. So there were numerous signs. And in fact, when Muhammad was born, an angel came to his mother. And this is all according to the Seerah. An angel came to his mother and said, your son will be born. You will call him Muhammad. He will be the Lord of the worlds, and such things, right? And then also, he fell out of his mother calmly and peacefully like no other baby ever before, totally peaceful. And then he put his hands on the ground as a baby and raised his head to the skies and looked up at God. And there was a whole bunch of things. And and then when he was 4 years old, these angels cut him open and took out the evil from him and sealed him up with the Zamzam. And now, if all of these things had happened at the age of 4, why is there no mention of this later? And then shouldn't this have been part and parcel of his prophethood from the beginning? But you've got nothing in the beginning, at least nothing in the Quran. Then you've got these myths that come afterwards. And then suddenly, at age 40, bang, out of nowhere, he's like, hey, this is a big surprise. Then what about all these miraculous events at his birth and prior? And prior to his birth, at his birth, and after his birth?
And yet the Quran states quite clearly that Muhammad had no miracles.
That is also true, but then, of course, they claim that Muhammad was the most prolific miracle worker of all the prophets to ever live, including Jesus.
Yeah, well, if you're having open heart surgery in the middle of the desert, I'll sue for malpractice, because that's a miracle in itself. Anyway, moving forward on point 5. Khadija encourages Muhammad to be glad and rejoice. But why? Her husband has just come home clearly frightened. There has been hardly any time to think, and already she is taking control and leading this situation. Point 6. It is now at this point alarm bells should start ringing, as Khadija then goes on to proclaim, I have hope in you, hope you will be the prophet. This is the moment Islam is born, and it is Khadija who gives birth to Islam. Quite simply, Khadija is the real prophet and mastermind of Islam. Point 7. Khadija then confirms, as it were, the demographic location of this soon would-be prophethood to this community, but not globally, not to mankind, and not as a mercy. So you can extrapolate all these points from the hadiths that have been read and the ones that we're going to be looking at in a moment. So moving forward, Khadija was... Sorry, go on.
Pause there. On this point, as I said, I just recently bought a book which I've been reading. I'm about halfway through it on pre-Islamic Arabia, the Jahiliyyah, the culture that Muhammad and his tribe came from, and it was in the Quran, and it's downplayed in the Quran, but it's actually quite significant once you unpack the history and the culture. Muhammad is called a mad poet because it was common, and that's actually quite significant. But I'll do a show on this in the future once I finish the book and finish the notes chapter by chapter. In that it was very common. The jinn did not start in the Quran. It started prior in the Jahiliyyah, but a jinn was not as we know it in the Quran. They were changed by Muhammad afterwards. The concept of the jinn was a demon that was like a familiar. The jinn was like a muse that associated itself with a poet. It would possess a poet and make that poet speak. It would make that poet recite words that otherwise they could not. It would give them superhuman ability to recite glorious poetry. And the more evil, the more powerful the demon, the better and the greater the poet would become. And within that culture, a poet then was then always hoping to be accosted by a very powerful demon so that he could win and be the greatest poet. And this is the culture that Muhammad came from. And in fact, it was an oral culture because they did not have writing. And the only way to be remembered was to have a poet craft something about you, a poem about you, memorize it and repeat it. And this was the only way to be remembered because there was no writing or you'd be forgotten. So the ability to recite, the ability to remember, recite, and speak about things in flowery prose was the only way for the culture to continue forward.
It'd be a great way of remembering as well, poetry, because you remember with rhythm and rhyme, don't you? And as far as these demons are concerned, they must be taking possession of Eminem and Machine Gun Kelly these days. Then they've obviously progressed and got into with Def Jam Records. So Khadija was clearly a bright, intelligent, wealthy businesswoman who employed, amongst other men, her future husband. It cannot be underestimated how immediately she saw an opportunity to further her stature in her local community of her literal family, friends, and neighbors. Perhaps using her stature and the respect she had gained over the years to influence her local community into believing that her husband, who has been chosen by Allah, after all, who would challenge the intelligent, wealthy, and influential woman who was no doubt of good character? And I think that's the point, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, on that
she
point,
is the one that set this up.
She was married to a man called Nabash bin Zarakh bin Waqdan. He was a visionary for the jinn before she met Muhammad. These jinn appeared to Nabash in the form of an old man to give him information. Abu Bakr was the most important disciple of Nabash. Abu Bakr remained a close friend of Khadija, and he was eager to obey her when she declared Muhammad was the prophet instead of her former husband. And as a wife of a visionary of jinn, this gave Khadija prestige because many Arabians consulted jinn visionaries and gave them money, and this partly explains why Khadija was wealthy. You see, did she become wealthy because her husband was an oracle for the jinn, that he was possessed by these jinn, these evil demons, and would give advice and knowledge, or did they become wealthy because, now I think in Islam obviously they will focus on, well, she was a wealthy caravan trader because they don't want you looking at the occult aspect of Islam.
I think that you mentioned a very good point that I had considered, that maybe the much of the wealth had been gained, as you say, through the communication of her husband with the spirit realm, as opposed to trading. But trading could have been just like a side business, as it were, or an offshoot of what they were of their main income. And that's what Islam is predicating Khadija on, is her wealth as a businesswoman, rather than her wealth that has been mostly accrued, as you've just mentioned there, through spiritualistic practices, because of the implication of that.
Right. So Islam has a way of redirecting and because they don't want you to understand that at its higher levels, Islam is a Gnostic, occult form of paganism.
And then this is probably why Khadija doesn't get mentioned much. And the interesting thing is, as well, is that if Muhammad is a role model to mankind, why is it we're not seeing very many 24-year-old men or 26-year-old men marrying 40-year-old widows in the Muslim world? If Muhammad is the role model, why is this part of his character, which is actually a very good part of the character, if you're a 26-year-old man to take on a widow, that would be a very good thing to do. but we don't see Muslims do this. We find 40-year-old men wanting to marry 6-year-old girls.
Disgusting, but yes, that is true.
So moving forward. So moving forward with Tabari, volume 73, or Ishaq 107, it reads, "Cousin, can you tell me when this visitor comes to you?" Muhammad replied, "Yes." She said, "Tell me when he comes." Gabriel came to him as before, and Muhammad said, "Here is Gabriel, who has just come to me." She said, "Yes, come, cousin, and sit by my left thigh." He came, and she said, "Can you see him?" Muhammad said, "Yes." Khadija continues, "Move around and sit on my right thigh." He did so, and she said, "Can you see him?" He replies, "Yes." She then said, "Sit on my lap." He did so, and she said, "Can you see him?" He replied, "Yes." She was grieved and flung off her veil and disclosed her body, and we'll assume it was naked, while Muhammad was sitting on her lap. Then she said, "Can you see him?" Muhammad replied, "No." At that she said, "Rejoice, cousin, by Allah, this spirit is an angel and not Satan." I mean, that account there in Ishaq and Tabari should ring alarm bells as well. How would she know the nature of a spirit creature with reference to whether they were modest or not? Because the implication is that the mystery spirit was an angel, not a devil, because he was too modest to look upon an old woman's body. But angels don't lust, and pre-Islamic women didn't wear veils. Perhaps a 6-year-old woman's wrinkled body and drooping spaniel's ears were enough to disturb even demons. Why would such a thing take place? Why would Khadija?
That's interesting. Yeah, why would she have a veil? Was this a detail added in afterwards? I'm looking at it here in. So I'm looking at this. It's page 100. It's section 154 on page one. Let's see. It's page 107, section 154 of Guillaume's The Life of Muhammad. So I'm just showing people that. But yes, those are good questions. So has the story been edited so that we have an incorrect view of it? Because clearly they are trying to avoid certain aspects of the story.
Exactly. I mean, the thing is to see the story should speak for itself.
She cast aside her veil. Why would she be wearing a veil? This wasn't the practice. You're right.
So and also, why would she think that an angel would turn away in modesty? From her naked body. That in itself is what. How would she know angels would do that, but demons wouldn't? And the thing is as well, we're talking about angels, but they don't believe that, do they? They believe in angels and jinn, but the word jinn doesn't come up here, does it? It's Satan or demons.
Well, these were terms that the Satan in Islam. See, when I do the show, once I finish the notes, from the culture of the time, that there were many Satans, not just the Satan. So the jinns, Satans, demons, kind of an interchangeable term. So yeah, this would be interesting to actually go into the Jahiliyyah in the future and talk about this and relate it to modern Islam. But yes, I mean, the story doesn't quite make sense. I mean,
No,
how does this confirm prophethood? I showed the demon my boobies and he ran away, so therefore you're a prophet.
Yes, exactly that. Exactly that. And they're moving forward in history just by a week or two. Then in this instance, Ishaq 106, 107, and Al-Tabari, volume 6, page 72. She then put on her cloak and took Muhammad to consult her cousin Waraka. It appears from the start Muhammad, the pure and perfect man, does not have a clue as to what is taking place, but Khadija does. Khadija does not exhibit any doubt at all as to her husband's spiritual experience, but rather is either experienced, learned enough, though this is in a period of Jahiliyyah, to know how to proceed. So my point there is, she's taking control of the situation, and now she's going to take Muhammad to her waraka to affirm his prophethood. But if this is the period of ignorance, and we're talking about the period of ignorance of what godly truth is, because by now in Islamic parlance, Allah has sent 123,999 prophets. All of their messages have been bastardized and corrupted and deviated and diluted. How would she know how to proceed, and what is her source in order to know how to proceed with this situation? If every prophet has come before, 123,999, and all of them have failed, what is the truth that she has, and where did she get it from in knowing how to proceed in this moment in history from knowing the nature of Muhammad, the angel, from knowing the nature of the God, from knowing the nature of the situation, and now taking control of the situation and taking Muhammad to Waraka. What is all of this predicated on? What is the
Well,
source?
before Muhammad went to Waraka, she went to Waraka. So it says here she rose and gathered her garments, right? And then she went to Waraka, who had become a Christian, quote unquote, and read the scriptures and learned from those that follow the Torah and the gospel. Now, there's lots of people that claim to be Christians, right, who are not, who are actually anti Christian, who are Gnostics, who are other sects that are not Christian. They don't accept the Bible as is. And Waraka cried, Holy, holy, by him in whose hand is Waraka's. If thou hast spoken to me the truth, Khadija, there hath come unto him the greatest Namus, meaning Gabriel, who came to Moses aforetime, and he is the prophet of this people. Bid him be of good heart. So Khadija returned to the apostle of Allah and told him what Waraka had said. So this was something between her and Waraka.
Yes.
Before Muhammad even got involved.
Yeah. And this yet again is what is all this predicated on? What is the source? There has to be some kind of objective source, because before Khadija goes to Waraka, she still knows what's going on. She's taking control of the situation.
Mm-hmm.
She's taking control of the situation, and I'd like to know from the Muslim world, what is her source of information that makes her take control of the situation? Why is it she knows more about Allah and the spirit realm than what Muhammad does? And yet, in Islamic sources, Muhammad is supposed to be the light, the first thing that Allah created. It can even be the second, third, the fourth, or fifth. Yet he's oblivious to the point of thinking he's suicidal and and thinks he's insane.
That is actually a very good point. He was completely clueless, and yet he's supposed to be the chosen one, but he's being groomed by two others who are known to be heretics and known to be worshippers of paganism and involved in pagan rituals.
Yes, and this goes to what Tabari then says. He goes, Tabari, one of the first biographers of the Prophet Muhammad, writes, that evening, leaving the mountain, Muhammad went to Khadija, his wife, and said, "Oh Khadija, I believe I am going mad." Why, she asked. Because he said, I see myself in the signs of the possessed. When I walk along the road, I hear voices from each stone and each hill. In the night, I dream of an immense being in front of me, a being whose head touches the sky and whose feet touch the earth. I do not know it, and it approaches me in order to take me. One day, finding himself with Khadija in his house, Muhammad said, "O Khadija, this being appears to me. I see it." Khadija approached Muhammad, sat down, took one out one of her breasts and said, "Do you still see it?" "Yes," she said. Then Khadija uncovered her head and her hair and said, "Do you see it now?" "No, Muhammad." Khadija said, "Rejoice. It is not a demon, but an angel." And yet it's just like another version of what we've already read. But there was an interesting point in this when he talks about he saw an immense being, right, with his feet on the ground and his head touching the sky. I couldn't help but think that, you know what, that sounds very similar to something like we read in the book of Daniel.
There are only two historical references to a massive angel who stretches from horizon to horizon, because he mentions here Gabriel in the form of a man with feet astride the horizon. There is only one other historical reference. It's another Gnostic reference that discusses an angel who stretches from heaven to heaven. So that again is something that is plagiarized from an earlier religious text. But go on.
Yeah, but I was just thinking that, when you consider the vision that the prophet Daniel had, with an immense being, its head of gold, its chest of silver, its loins of copper, I think, and its legs of iron. It's described in Daniel's dream as a giant image. And when I read this the first time many years ago, I couldn't help but think, is that where the story comes from? Is that sort of like where Muhammad's got it confused, or the Muslim writers have got it confused, or have they taken something that they've learnt from Judaism and tried to graft it into Islam to make it look more religious, to try and find some kind of common similarity between what's written in the Hebrew scriptures and what's in the Quran, so as to make it sound or look or appear or have a veneer of a continuation?
I'm trying to find the reference to the idea of this angel that is 96 miles tall. It's no, really. As I said, the only other reference in history to an angel like this is an angel that is 96 miles tall. Its feet are 4 miles long, 2 miles wide, and the angel I think is 16 miles wide or something like that. And it's taken from the book of the, oh good grief, it'll come to me. But yeah, there's only one other reference, so someone might have it in the chat. But yeah, but this is very interesting that they're taking old myths and they're repurposing them for the purpose of Muhammad here, I think.
Yes. So I mean, for me now, I mean, this is there are many sources I could have probably picked out and cut and paste and put into my notes, but I suppose the sum total now is now is probably a good time to mention that Muhammad had a defect on his back.
Alika says, hold on, Alika says something in the chat. Keep an eye on the chat. Someone says, sitting in the lap is curious. In the story of Sophia in Tabari, she dreamt of the moon coming down into her lap. So there's some interesting little tidbits that come up.
I don't recall that story. But then there is so much of Islam to read that, you know, it's impossible for certainly for me to probably keep up with all of it. But I don't recall that story. Hello?
Yeah, go on.
So now is probably a good time to mention that Muhammad had a defect on his back that has later been claimed to or referred to as a sign or the seal of the prophets. Yet he himself is unaware as to why he has this defect. His tribe derived no meaning from the lump. His boss wife is unaware to the significance of this lump. Yet only after the prophet has been claimed do others now realize the significance of this body defect. However, how could he not recognize this significance himself? 123,909 previous prophets and 1,500 years of biblical records make no mention of a sign or a seal of prophets. The phrase has never been used and no physical deformity has ever been mentioned. So the point I want to make on that is Muhammad is 40 years old when he gets the revelation in the cave. Khadija's been with him for how long? 16 years now? Yeah, he's got a lump on his back. At this moment, or during that period of moment, this seal of the prophets is not recognized. He's not recognized when he's born. He's not recognized. I'm sure people would have seen his naked back as he was growing up. This sign or seal is not mentioned. It's not mentioned for 16 years while he's married to his boss, Khadija. It's only now that the significance of this lump on his back is mentioned. I find that quite strange as well.
Right, that is very, very interesting. And yeah, it's a hairy mole on his back. And in fact, in one of the Seerah stories, someone is riding on a camel or a horse behind him, and this person actually puts his mouth and covers this thing with his mouth, and it releases a fragrance of musk because this guy wanted to. It just makes me ill thinking about it.
Please no more. It's Sunday. Children are listening.
Yeah.
But that's it. So that's the my basis to say that Islam has been actually created or enforced or originated with Khadija. And the irony is that the most wealthy, affluent, and free businesswoman goes on to create a religion that she basically starts based on the Islamic sources that enslaves women for the following 1400 years up until today. So what appeared to be a blessing for her has turned out to be a historical curse for women born in that religion. And it can't be underestimated the damage that it has done to women during that period of time, being involved in that religion. I mean, it's easy for us to sit here now in the Western world to see the freedoms that we have. And the women and that females have in this country, but even when you consider the feminist movements and the suffragettes and that to get their own independent freedoms in the Christian world, if that has been a struggle with freedoms, you can't imagine the struggle it is to be born a female in a Muslim world where you're just treated as cattle or as an incubator, devoid of any expression of free will or love or creativity, and that has been ongoing for 1400 years.
Right. Okay, so just a point I want to make. So it's called the Book of Al-Kasai, and it's taken from a group called the Alkasites. They were quote-unquote Jewish sect. They arose around 80 116 in Mesopotamia, and they took their name from the Book of Al-Kasai, which claimed to contain revelations given to Al-Kasai, or hidden power, by an angel. Right? So the revelations, this book, these revelations were given to Al-Kasai by an angel. And this angel is 96 miles tall. I think he's 16 miles wide. His feet are 4 miles long, 2 miles wide, and 2 miles deep. His footprint is like 2 miles deep. And when they make the mention to Gabriel in the form of a man with feet astride the horizon, this is the only other historical reference to an angel who is so massive that he covers the entire sky. So the Book of Al-Kasai, or the story of the Al-Kasai, and this reference to Muhammad are the only two. So the obvious conclusion is that this was plagiarized from the Book of Al-Kasai. And in theory, the Book of Al-Kasai fell from heaven, was sent down from heaven. So there's lots of reason to think that this was plagiarized. And in the 3rd century, this book was taken over by Judeo-Christians who held beliefs similar to those of the Ebionites. Now, if Waraka was an Ebionite, then he would have inherited these ideas.
And yeah, again, it just gives a further testimony that the more you dismantle Islam, the more you find that it's all its stories, all its origins, all its narratives have been basically, it's like walking into a restaurant where it's not, it does everything. So you could pretty much fill your plate with whatever. You want a slice of a chicken tikka over there, and then you put on your same plate a piece of pizza or a bit of Yorkshire pudding. It does everything, but it does everything poorly. Have you ever been to one of those restaurants? Islam, it seems to be like that. It takes all these stories, bastardizes them, remixes them into the image of Muhammad, but it does it so poorly.
Right. No, definitely. It's a concoction. It's a very poor concoction of rotten fruit and vegetables stirred together. Yeah. So, yeah, it's interesting when you start to look, you start to see these parallels. I mean, this is really weird, that. Oh, and also he says here, "Woe is me, poet or possessed." Again, this is reference to the Jahiliyyah. He believed he was being possessed by a demon.
But also his accusers accused him of that. Here comes, I think their phrase is like, and I paraphrase, but here comes the possessed poet.
Right.
And he there's also some accounts in the Quran where it talks about he sells this. Where Muhammad accuses, I think it may be the Jews or the Christians, don't sell your stories for a paltry price. So it goes on to show that he actually paid to have stories recounted to him. He would listen to the stories, because there's also another one in the Quran about Muhammad being all ears, good ears he has, because he's been accused of listening to these stories, twisting them, and coming them out, sort of like making them in his own image. I forget which Quranic reference that is, where Muhammad is all ears.
It is correct. It's I'll find it in the Seerah. Yes, definitely. It's in Guillaume's So guys, the Life of Muhammad, a translation of Ibn Ishaq's Sirat Rasulullah. This is well worth getting a copy of. Get hold of a copy, archive.org, PDF. You can find it many places. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, so when you really analyze it, for those who believe the biblical narrative, it's kind of obvious that Satan is behind Islam. Satan and the demons are behind Islam. And it's almost like they are having a field day. Like with evolution, look what we're making these crazy human beings believe. To pull them away from the biblical narrative. Look how far-fetched they've gone with evolution and Islam. The two contending forces against the Bible as they are today. And yet within evolution, you can see it self-destructs, because at any scientific level, there is no empirical evidence to even suggest that evolution is even possible. But going to Islam, all the evidence you have for Islam to be destroyed is actually contained within Islam. You don't have to look externally for historical sources, references. All the information you need to destroy Islam is within Islam, in the Quran and in the Hadith. For instance, 94 Adam or 124,000 prophets, or even including in the information that you bring out with the biographers of the fiqh and the Sharia. It's all there. We don't need external sources to destroy Islam. It self implodes. Every time it seems like, sometimes I remember things because I've not written them down, and then you see you have a wonderful ability to either locate it or you memorize it, and you're bringing them up now, for instance, and it's all coming from Islam's own sources.
Here it is. So this is the reference here. It's in page 243, section 357, and it says here, whoever wants to see Satan, let him take a look at Nabtal bin al-Harith. He was a sturdy black man with long flowing hair, inflamed eyes, and dark, ruddy cheeks. It was he who said, Muhammad is all ears. If anyone tells him anything, he believes it.
What kind of poor reference do you need? If that's a damning indictment, if anything. Within Islam's own sources, you have a damning indictment of that. That should ring alarm bells. This goes back to what I've just said. All the information you need to destroy Islam is inside Islam.
Yeah, and also I've got comments in the chat that were saying that while Ibn Ishaq calls him a Christian, he's called a Nasarian, and which is mistranslated. So the Nasarian doesn't necessarily mean Christian. It means, I think, sort of a Jewish Christianic sect, but it doesn't mean that these were true Christians. It could mean these were heretics of some form or another, but they were simply just lumped into Christianity because they were similar to.
The other thing I wanted to make mention on this as well is that when the hadith turns around and says where the angel is grabbing hold of Muhammad and said, read in the name of your Lord, but the name of the Lord's not mentioned. In fact, in the Quran, the name's not mentioned, and the hadith not mentioned in my parlance, because when you go to the Hebrew and Greek scriptures, you have the in the Greek scriptures it's the tetragrammaton, but in the Hebrew scriptures you have the four consonants, which are YHWH or JHWH. That's either pronounced Yahweh or it's pronounced Jehovah. Okay, so and they are repeated in the Bible over 7,000 times. We know that in the first century, the Jews it became like a superstition on their part to not pronounce the name, because I think it's something to do with taking the Lord's name in vain. So the removal of the name was then sort of like what was copied into the Bible. So you find that the word Lord in caps, wherever you see the word Lord, that's where the tetragrammaton is supposed to be there, either in the Hebrew scriptures or in the Greek scriptures. So you can see in Islamic parlance, right, that in 1,500 years of the biblical narrative being revealed, that the divine name is in the Bible, whether you want to pronounce it Yahweh or whether you want to pronounce it Jehovah, it's there 7,000 times plus. Yet over 600 years later, a book is revealed to Muhammad in the name of your Lord, but he doesn't know what the name of the Lord is.
Right.
That should ring alarm bells as well. And you don't find an Arabic translation or transliteration of the divine name in either Jehovah or Yahweh.
That's crazy. And here's another reference within the Seerah. Gabriel came to the apostle and said, there comes to sit with you a black man with long flowing hair, ruddy cheeks, and inflamed eyes like two copper pots. His heart is more gross than a donkey's. He carries your words to the hypocrites, so beware of him.
That's a subject I was thinking that maybe you and I can discuss sometime in the future. I've got all the references, the racist references of what's contained in Islam's own sources, particularly because of the climate that the world's in at the moment with BLM, BAME, and for some kind of crazy reason, somebody has started a movement where there's this black and white contention at the moment, which I think, my attitude is, if Martin Luther King was alive today, how would he take to these movements? He would be disgusted by it. This is not what he intended, or would he be backing up?
No, because these guys, Martin Luther King wanted us to be judged by the content of our character, not by the color of our skin, and BLM is judging people by the color of their skin.
And the irony is, nobody could hate. And coming from that background, I can categorically confirm, coming from that background, nobody dislikes or hates black people more than Asians. That is a fact. And Islam is riddled with racism towards black people.
Yeah.
And yet, for some reason, the modern narrative with BLM, woke and blame, do not want to press this. You can buy a slave today in Libya for $200 or in Sudan for the same price. Slavery is still going on today with
Yeah.
Asians, Muslims selling black people. Nobody wants to mention that because it goes against the narrative.
Right. Right.
That could be a discussion in itself another time. But those points there, yeah, I've got those points, yeah. Disgusting.
Yeah. No. There's also mention in this article that Waraka inserted Ibnite doctrines about Jesus in the Quran, and so clearly, so Muhammad is this clueless guy that only after Khadija dies does he find his own feet. But prior to that, he's completely clueless, and an entire mythology is built up around him. But it is his wife that is first convinced that he's a prophet, which goes against the knowledge within the culture at the time, the historical context of the culture, and then Waraka, who pushes this idea through as well. So between the two of them, they connive to convince Muhammad that he's a prophet, and then of course Muhammad accepts this as gospel, I guess, and then he eventually goes on, and he must have learned a lot of these Gnostic things from, or these false Christian teachings, or unchristian teachings from Waraka. So he, between his wife, who was supposedly was also an Ibnite cult priestess or something, there's this is something that is not well enough known, but it seems that they are responsible for convincing him and forming his early opinions and views, miseducating him.
Yeah, and I think it can't be underestimated as well. If he was a traveling salesman, how much of what he learned while he was out and about selling the wares for Khadija, that he would have picked up on his travels from other traditions, customs that he would have encountered on his journeys.
Right. Yeah. Also, they speak of, I mean, his cousin, his grandfather, his father. They had a special zeal for the jinn religion of Arabia. Yeah.
His father is quite an interesting one, because there's something about his father having light and a woman wanting to have sex with him because he had light that night, and then the next
Yes.
day. You might know more about where the sources are located, but I remember
I discussed it
reading
with
that
Adam. I cannot remember offhand where it is, but his father, yeah. A woman sees his father and a light shining from his forehead, and she wants to sleep with him, and then he turns it down. But the next day, after his father impregnates Muhammad's mother, this woman sees him again, but she has no interest, and she says, because the light is gone from your forehead.
Yeah.
But then, of course, his father died without being a Muslim, so was his father condemned to hell?
Well, isn't there a hadith where it says that Muhammad went to his mother's grave crying, and the tears were streaming all over his beard because his mother died. His mother was her name Amina. She died in the period of Jahiliyyah, and there was nothing he could do to intercede for her and between her and Allah.
Right. No, agreed. So yeah, many unresolved questions, but yeah. Yeah, was there anything else? We've gone a bit over an hour, because I know we had a few minutes of poor connectivity.
Well,
yeah.
that's it for me. I mean, that those are the hadiths and the rationale that I'm presenting to if you like, evidence that Khadija is a true source of Islam, and that she manipulated Muhammad, and is therefore the creator of Islam. Obviously, not realizing what would become of it. But there's a certain irony that the freest, wealthiest woman in the Arabian Peninsula at that time, because we don't know of any other, goes on to create a religion that enslaves women for the next 1400 years, 1600 years.
Right. And also, we've been given a particular narrative that says she was a trader. Well, was her wealth originally derived from trading because her first husband was someone who channeled demons who predicted the future, and they got paid for this, and this made them wealthy.
Yeah.
So which came first, the chicken or the egg in this case? We don't, So I think it's reasonable to say that there's a case to be made that it's her husband's predictive ability. Now think, if her first husband was able to make her wealthy by channeling a demon who could tell the future, she now loses the husband. She now finds another man who is also channeling demons. And she goes, jackpot.
Can I just add on to what you're saying there? What you're saying is quite credible, because you've just reminded me of the accounts in the biographies about the custodianship of the Kaaba being of paramount importance.
Hmm.
That would lend credibility to what you're saying there, that it was a bit of a religious racket taking place.
Of course, they would sell things to the people who came there. It was like selling
Yeah.
them water and food and drink and accommodation and gifts and trinkets. So if they could then claim that he was a representative of the main god, they would take
Yes.
ownership of the Kaaba. Right.
Yes, there it is.
Okay, so there's a commercial aspect to this, which is very interesting. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think look, given what you've said and given the food for thought you've provided, there's lots of room to reevaluate the standard narrative in the light of new information. There's lots of places to go and dig, and lots of facts to uncover, which immediately alter the perspective.
Okay, so thank you for having me on, Lloyd. It's been a pleasure to be invited on your show and dispense some of this information that may or not have been of interest to your audience. And thank you for your input too, mate.
No, that's fascinating. Your information is always very thought provoking. You're connecting dots and you're providing glue that connects different things together in ways that even I haven't thought about. You know,
Cheers, dude. I'm trying to come up with something original because you guys have all gone in certain directions, and you by far have come up with the best material and the freshest on the internet that no one else is doing, and hence why I love liaising with yourself on these subjects, because I
no,
find you're doing something original, and I think I'm hoping in some way I can contribute to your information.
no, I appreciate that, man. I really, I'm looking forward to having more discussions with you. But this was actually very interesting, that you've now given me an understanding of the occult connections to his family. You've added, it's these little pieces that just you've connected some of these dots, and the audience, for the sake of the audience, Islam has an occult side, a mystical side. They call it mystical. It's a euphemism, but there's the most Muslims are just supposed to obey, to listen and obey.
Mm.
But the higher level clerics, they're the ones who do the occult intercession on behalf of the lower levels. And Islam is occultic from top to bottom when you start to take it apart. And this is a very little known, and I mean, well, everyone blames the Jews, right? The Jews, or the Roman Catholic Church, right? Whereas nobody has taken a microscope to Islam and looked at its occult aspects, and they run deep. And I'm going to show you something here. For instance, I'm just going to briefly run through this. I'm busy working on this right now. It's called Islam, the Nazis, and the Curious Case of Baron Rudolf von Subottendorf. This is incredible. This story, the more that I dig into this, the weirder this gets. All right. Now we know that Hitler had some fun things to say. He who has seen in National Socialism only a political movement has seen nothing. Just so you know, so this is Hitler. Sorry, my mistake. Somehow I put. Anyway, but so here we go. This is the guy that said this. National Socialism was not just a political movement. It happened to also be very much a religious kind of movement. So look, these are just the rough slides that I'm working on, but there are copious Islamic connections to the Nazis and Islam, right? And this is the man called Baron Rudolf von Subottendorf having tea with Hitler, right? So there are huge religious connections to the Nazis that people are not aware of. These are very raw, very rough slides. But this man was a Muslim, a Sufi, and he speaks of the secret practices of the Sufi Freemasons. His discussions, the Turkish Freemasons, who are Sufis, the original Sufis, the original Freemasons. This stuff is incredible, and he takes credit for inspiring Hitler to write Mein Kampf, right? And some of the information about the Templars and good grief, the historical information is incredible. Islam needs to be taken apart, and Thunderous, your information really sort of makes one go, hold on, I never saw that from that perspective yet. So thanks for that.
No, my pleasure. My pleasure.
So yeah, guys, we'll wind down here. Thank you very much for your time and for some of the interesting comments and questions. And guys, yeah, please have a look at Islam from a new perspective. I hope this was helpful to you. I'll be back with Thunderous soon. We're going to plan in next week. I'm going to be doing a discussion on the Injil. What is this Injil? And I've been doing a lot of academic research, utilizing some of the top scholars from Cambridge, Oxford, and so on, looking at some of their research papers on what is this Injil that is being discussed in the Quran. What is it? What can we infer from it? So just as a primer, and I'll be going through that in the near future with Thunderous if he'll join me.
Absolutely, would love to.
No, thank you. This is interesting, and yeah, guys, please hit the like. Oh, by the way, Thunderous channel is in the description. Please give his channel a visit, give it a subscribe, give this stream a like. I do appreciate all your support, and I'll see you guys soon. I might be back on a little later. Let me see. As you know, I was away. I was in South Africa. I got back recently. I had no fun at all getting out of South Africa because of that COVID scare, but I somehow, skin of my teeth, made it back. Good grief, you won't believe the stress. And I'll see you guys next time.
Bye, everybody.
Take care, everyone. Bye bye. God bless.